In 1999, Morpheus offered Neo a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. In 2018, this country fractured between red and blue. In 2022, I'm here to tell you that if you really want the truth, more voters are neither red or blue. Yet, they have no representation, no choice, and no options. They have to choose between candidates chosen by the red people or the blue people. I'm David Esrati, and I'm running for Congress as an American, as in red, white, and blue. I'm a veteran, an activist, and a small businessman. I'm asking you to join me in reminding the professional politicians in Congress who their bosses are. I support ranked choice voting, campaign finance reform, and a verified voter information system, all so we can stop having the best politicians money can buy. It's time to elect a veteran who will work for you, no matter what color they want to label you. Please go to electesrati.com and learn more. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. In Jurassic Park, you thought those little baby dinosaurs were cute until they turned into out-of-control carnivores. That's sort of what happens to government when we elect people based on very expensive advertising campaigns and propaganda. I'm David Esrati. I'm a veteran and a small businessman running for Congress. You don't want professional ad people and pollsters to sway your vote. All those hot-button issues like gun control, abortion, borders are all politicized to stop you from voting rationally. And thinking rationally seems to be in short supply these days. Most Americans have been voting against their own best self-interest for a long time because we've allowed money to buy our leaders. 1 million Americans died in the last 2 years because our leaders couldn't lead. It wasn't that hard. Mask, distance, test, and then vaccinate. In an instant, we had billions to spend on healthcare for COVID, when for years we've been told we can't provide healthcare for everyone equally in this country. That's an unintended consequence of the pandemic. If you think about it, our government can pretty much do whatever it wants, or what the people who buy our politicians tell our leaders to do. We also had a ton of money to prop up businesses. The next thing you know, it turns out that a living wage was not only possible, but necessary. As a small businessman who won't sell you out to corporate interests and lobbyists, I can tell you that it's time to fully understand the consequences of companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google and their effect on small business, and to remind you that small business is the #1 creator of jobs in this country. So this next election, don't trust this ad or any other political ad. Do your homework and think before you vote. It's time to put this ad man in Congress because I know that the best advertising is based on the truth, not the size of the budget or payroll. Or you can just vote based on who has the money to buy their way into Congress and live with the consequences. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. Hi, I'm David Esrati, and I'm running for Congress. And today we have a very special guest, fellow veteran Eric Price. Eric's running for state rep in Ohio's 70th, which is, of course, thanks to our Republicans who are on the redistricting commission, is also a gerrymandered unconstitutional district. The current occupant of that is Brian Lampton, who's had it for one term. He's following Rick Perales, who had been there for quite a while, and Rick got in a little bit of trouble, but he was term limited anyway, so now he's a county something or other, or township something or other.
County commissioner.
County commissioner. So he got promoted up, down, sideways for after getting caught with a woman who wasn't his wife in the parking lot of a restaurant. And long story, but who cares? He's gone. Now it's Brian Lampton. Brian is someone I know. I've known for a long time. He took my websitology class a long time ago, and I'm going to tell you straight up, he's a client. He's a very nice guy, but this is probably the guy you should vote for, and we're going to talk about why. So, Eric, why did you decide to run?
That's the question basically a lot of people end up asking. The biggest reason is because, honestly, I'm the kind of person, I don't want to say I can get along with anyone, but I can talk to anyone. I spent 25 years in the Air Force, and I worked law enforcement, so I've had to work with a lot of people that have been not exactly happy with me. You know how, I mean, we live in a very tribal world now where everyone's kind of, fighting each other. I'm not afraid to step out into those areas that are those uncomfortable areas. The Greene County Tea Party, I'm at pretty much every meeting I can be at where, I'm probably disagreeing with a lot of the things they're saying, but I think it's important to be in those spaces where you're listening. Clinton years back said, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. If it's a good idea and it's good for the people, you got to go with that. And I think that's a very important lesson from that era.
So I have a great deal of respect for police officers. I've got quite a few of friends, including the one that arrested me back in 1996 in the city commission meeting. And the reality is that job, you show up with people at their worst almost every single time. I mean, they're either in the middle of an altercation, somebody's drunk, somebody's had some sort of bad thing happen to them, and the police show up and they have to try to get everybody happy and copacetic and calm down and diffuse the situation. So police officers are really good at showing up in volatile situations and straightening things out. So that training is invaluable, especially, I don't know if it's going to help a whole lot in the State House because it's still gerrymandered to be a supermajority for the Republicans, but you as a voter can fix that. So you can say, we're going to get rid of some Republicans and add some Democrats. And I'm going to tell you, I've been out with Eric several times for a day while we're sitting there talking. He will arm wrestle anybody, okay? but he'll also, approach them in a friendly manner and have a real conversation. So I feel comfortable that, this is the kind of guy that's got 25 years of experience working with people who don't get along and might be just the answer in the State House. But are there other issues? Are there issues, the specific issues that forced you? What?
I mean, as a veteran, so all the things that you ended up fighting for as a veteran, the core beliefs that you have, the freedoms that we have as individuals, so many of those things that we have that we're seeing kind of evaporating away are, I kind of take that personally. I put so much of my life into fighting for, my family, for America, for, the people in America, the future of America. And I feel like, a lot of that is getting taken away from us. And I think it's important to, not just keep on to it, but get a lot of that back.
The same oath you take to be seated in office is very similar to the oath that you take when you enlist in the military. And it's to protect the Constitution and take this country and protect it. And we're losing some constitutional protections. And it's weird how we're losing them. They're getting bought by people with lots of money who are controlling things to make it the way they want it. And it's when I'm with Mike Turner, he's got 19 billionaires from out of state. But starting in about 1990 or so, the Koch brothers started re-engineering every state house and gerrymandering and trying to take over the state houses. And they have this thing called ALEC, ALEC, which I can't remember what it stands for right now, but it's a legislative think tank that writes the laws for these people, because none of these guys are capable of writing 600-page bills or 2,000-page bills, which is what they're sitting there and voting on blindly and changing the way things go. But I think the main things we've seen in Ohio, some things that have been really, really contested, was first, we had a shooting in the Oregon district, less than a mile from here. Mm-hmm. And people asked Governor DeWine to do something, and his solution was to remove all training requirements for carry and conceal and background checks, and to suggest that we arm teachers in school buildings. And I think I'm talking to a verifiable expert about what happens when you have an active shooter going. So can you tell me first what you think of unlimited constitutional carry, which is an advertising term for let any hillbilly carry a gun and conceal it now, and talking about arming teachers and asking them to do the job of a trained professional.
I mean, so the teacher thing I'm very familiar with. I'd worked at the headquarters over here at AFMC, and I worked with authoring. I've worked on nuclear weapon security. I've worked on anti-terrorism. I've worked on just basic aircraft security, security across the Air Force, and a large part of it was active shooter training. And we had conferences, we've exercised, we've evaluated. I've had so much experience when it comes to, the dynamic entry, how to train people on dynamic entry. I've had experience training on weapons from, pretty much the smallest handheld weapons all the way up to vehicle-mounted grenade launchers. So I have a decent amount of experience when it comes to, the whole gamut of it. My experience specifically at the headquarters gave me kind of like that insight into telling me, if you see something in an instruction, what are going to be the third and fourth order effects on how that's going to affect people. And you can't, especially when it comes to nuclear weapon security, you can't you don't have a second chance. There's only one chance.
Yeah,
and if you're not doing it right every single time, you could cause a lot of trouble. I think it's very important, especially when it comes to our kids. We need to treat our security of our kids in the same manner, and I don't feel like we're doing that when we're kind of arbitrarily arming with it's 24 hours, I think, of training. I know the Bellbrook school board is looking at 40 hours of training, which in my opinion doesn't even come close to what you would need to be able to respond to a situation that you're going to have to shoot probably a former student. So teachers are going to have to, we're anticipating teachers are probably going to end up, if they volunteer, would end up having to shoot someone that
they may know.
They probably taught. I know a lot of the school board there thinks that if they harden the school enough, that an active shooter is going to go somewhere else. And the sad fact of it is, your average active shooter is going there to commit suicide. He's got he or she has some serious things going on in their life, and they're looking to end it. So the more hardened of a facility that they think it is actually kind of better for them. You're going to attract that kind of person.
Death by cop is one of the primary ways people commit suicide in this country.
And we're potentially looking at death by teacher or
death by the
lunch lady.
Now, I haven't had near as much experience in, quote, active shooting, but I spent quite a bit of time going into buildings, clearing them, and what it takes. And to do this, okay, schools are a little different because you probably have a map available. You know the building. You have the architectural plans. When I was training, we didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't have fiber optic cameras to slide in like you see in, TVs and movies. But you have to go in and you have to make split-second decisions under fire to decide who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And we'd have pop-up targets in these kill rooms, and we'd have balloons on their heads, and there'd be blue team, green team, and it's dark, and we'd throw a flashbang in there to start the whole thing, and there'd often be smoke. And it is incredibly high stress, and your heart is going at about 120 beats a second after you're doing this, and you're supposed to hold your gun and hit perfectly. I'm going to tell you, we spent day after day after day going through the same buildings with different scenarios set up inside them, and still our percentages were pretty low on actual hits. But in my instance, it wasn't one person. It was never one person. It was a military force. There was more than one person. And they were a little more predictable. They would do things that are rational because they typically weren't suicidal. They were there, expecting to fight it out and everything else. But let's throw in some other equations. I mean, you've got screaming kids. You've got possibly, hostages or not. You don't know who you're going up against and what their level of skill is. You probably don't know what weapons they have. And you don't know if they've got the place rigged. This is not something you want a teacher dealing with.
No, absolutely not.
We saw what happened in Uvalde, where the trained forces wouldn't even go in. And speed is of the essence in these instances. I mean, you lose your advantage. Now, I know that most people think that Die Hard was real. Okay? I realize everybody thinks that John McClane really could take out an entire trained force of terrorists in this tower. But the likelihood of that ever happening in real life is slim and none. Am I correct?
Yeah, and everyone thinks they're John McClane and not, the guy that's going to freeze up and fumble.
In movies, they never reload, and they never miss.
Right.
The bad guys miss. That's not the way it works.
Well, the good guys miss, too. The sad thing about even your expert law enforcement, when they're responding to situations, kind of like what you were talking about when it comes to, your heart's beating, your adrenaline's rushing, the decisions, the decisions you normally make, even in a training scenario where you have a lot of things going on, your ability to decide things goes down when your heartbeat, your adrenaline, your stress goes up. And those times that you can think back in your life where those things have happened, those moments become they're very long. You remember those moments. They hold on to you. They hold on to you. And that's one of those things that teachers are going to make that split second pause that you have to train out of someone. 40 hours is just not enough for that. So it's a joke.
Just for when I was in the Army, we had Delta at Fort Bragg. Those guys shot, on average, something like 5,000 rounds a week. They trained every day of the week shooting, and they were great shots, and they were great at what they do. But that was all they did. You cannot expect a teacher. You can't expect the normal police officer who realistically doesn't pull his weapon more than once a year to come in and all of a sudden be Superman. It just isn't going to happen. So let's talk about legislation. What do you think the solution is?
So from my standpoint, the solution for fixing a lot is developing a planning process actually for each of the schools. One of the problems with the Bellbrook schools is they came up with a planning process that was very incomplete. And every time you leave something out of complete planning process, you just always, it creates a vulnerability for you. So every time you exercise that, or it becomes a real scenario, it becomes a hazard for someone. There are 5 Ds. I can run through them, but I don't really think there's any value in it.
We're not doing a training video.
No. That's why I was like, oh, hey, I can show you my expertise, right. But it just.
Let me ask you something. Should an 18-year-old be able to go out and buy a semi-automatic weapon in this country without going through some sort of training and checking?
There absolutely needs to be a training process, and I don't really want to say a vetting process. I kind of, I do support the Second Amendment, but at the same time, I support the whole Second Amendment, where...
Which was part of a well-regulated militia, and so far we haven't had a shooter that was part of a well-regulated militia yet.
Well, it's my opinion that because of the way the amendment is written, I actually think the government has a responsibility to provide training for individuals when it comes to weapons training for individuals that have some of the longer guns or some of the more.
It's called going in the military, isn't it?
It is.
Becoming a police officer.
But when it comes to individuals in the militia or militia-like behaviors, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But we have to be able to provide the training for that kind of thing.
Okay.
I think it's also important to have a route for someone to be able to self-identify on when they may not be able to carry a gun.
Okay.
I went through a time in my life when the Air Force killed my daughter, and I was by no means, ready or should be around weapons at any time.
Let's clarify that statement too before,
sure,
so that people don't think that the Air Force.
They killed my daughter. They actually did kill my daughter.
Okay.
So it was while I was deployed in Iraq. They were. She was in to get some dental work done. When they ran the IV on her, they didn't prime the IV, and they ended up pushing air into her cardiovascular system.
A medical professional employed by the Air Force,
right,
killed your daughter.
It was gross negligence,
right?
Yes.
And that happens.
Mm-hmm.
It happens in all walks of life. Medical professionals make mistakes,
mm-hmm.
and it's not really ever acceptable, but it does happen. And I just want to make sure you didn't think they carpet bombed her.
No carpet bombing of my daughter. No.
All right, but let me ask you a few questions. When you were starting out in your military career, do you ever recall taking your weapons back to the barracks on your own?
Never.
No. Where were the weapons?
Well, you always cleaned them and tried to turn them in. Whoever.
You put them in the armory and they were under guard, right?
The entire time, yes.
Yeah, and when you took them out, there were more than one of you,
mm-hmm.
and there were training officers supervising.
Mm-hmm.
And usually later on, when even in a combat zone, there's more than one of you
mm-hmm.
there that is armed.
Right.
And you perform a check and a balance. You're never really alone by yourself in the military with a weapon.
I mean,
it's not an ideal situation for your own safety.
Right, other than, performing our law enforcement duties, but...
Right, but cops usually prefer to work in pairs too.
Most
for
of
the
the
same
time we
reason.
are in
Somebody
pairs
has your
anymore,
back.
Yeah.
That's the key. So whenever you see a lone gunman, that's already sort of a warning sign that something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not wearing a uniform and they have a gun and they're wandering around, they're not up to any good, because you don't really need a gun to keep yourself safe. In fact, statistics say you're less safe. But the state of Ohio has basically removed all restrictions, all ways of doing checks, all ways of even the police officer approaching a vehicle where they used to be able to know that you had a carry and conceal license. They've removed that too, because they'd come up to your vehicle and say, hey, are you armed? And you were supposed to respond. Now that's no longer allowed. As an MP, as an SP, as a police officer, would you like to know if there's a gun in the car?
I mean, yeah, I think it's pretty important for you to have at least knowledge of if it, so while you're focusing on a specific situation, everything legitimate, even the individual having the weapon
right.
in the first place, could be entirely legitimate.
Right.
But everything else you have going on around you, you never know what kind of things are happening. You could eventually, or just out of the blue, be ambushed, and that's happened before.
And the police officers have said they want to know this,
mm-hmm.
and they don't approve of this, but that's what the state legislature did. So all the police said, we want to have actual restrictions, and we want people to identify when they have a weapon. Were you ever stopped when you were wearing civilian clothes when you were on active duty by a police officer?
Yes.
Did you identify yourself as a police officer or as an SP at the time? Did you say you had a weapon with you?
I didn't have a weapon with me at the time, and I don't believe I did identify myself as a cop.
Okay.
I didn't feel it was necessary.
Okay. But if you were armed at the time, you probably would have...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially before getting out of the car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So we've talked a lot about guns and mm-hmm. all this stuff. What are some other things that you think need to change? What do you think you can do better than our Congress?
I mean, Brian Lampton, I've heard him described, I've never met him in person, I've heard him described as a nice guy, I've heard him, I've heard some good things about him, but I think the biggest thing I've heard about him thus far is he's going to vote whichever way his party tells him. He doesn't provide any independent, kind of thought. It's just, kind of a rubber stamp for the Republican Party. It's another position that just whatever they tell him to do, he's going to do. And I think it's important, whether that person be, Democrat or Republican, not to be a rubber stamp for anything that, your party is going to is going to end up doing. You have to be able to look at the information. You have to say, is this really good for the people I'm representing? And if it's not, don't do it. There are so many things that I think we need to look at in government.
Let's hear them.
Our healthcare right now is
Okay.
an absolute shambles. We have a lot. The most recent poll I've taken on, or I've heard taken on how we're doing in healthcare is there's a 70% dissatisfaction in trust, or we don't trust what our the outcomes of our healthcare system. My own mother ended up dying from cancer, actually 2 weeks before my daughter, because she couldn't try another type of treatment that could have, realistically extended her life.
So are you in favor of healthcare for all, or single payer, or taking it out of the hands of your employers and putting it in your hands to pick your providers? No?
So, like I said, from when it comes to national kind of policy things, yes, I do I lean towards that. I have to look at what we can do from the Ohio State House, and I think I would support a single payer as long as we could bring down the cost that single payer ends up having to pay. If the government ends up having to pay, so much of what we're paying for insurance right now ends up going to the middleman and insurance companies, and it doesn't go
CareSource.
Any care as opposed to
they're paying their CEO millions of dollars
exactly
to support poor people, and that makes zero sense at all.
Yeah, there's no value in it for.
So healthcare's one. What else?
Healthcare's one. Actually, law enforcement would be a big one too. A lot of our law enforcement individuals are so overly tasked with just crazy things they're doing. They're not mental health professionals. They're not health professionals. They're not they're moms and dads, but they shouldn't come to work to be moms and dads. We have social services that should take care of a lot of things. They're just being asked to do a lot of jobs that they're not really trained for, and that's the majority of things they end up doing. Whereas, if they're getting drowned in this other work, and I'm not trying to say, use of force isn't an important thing, and you need to, focus on cops. But when you're focusing on all the other things, some of the important stuff, can slip or go by the wayside. And we see a lot of accidents that happen with cops because they're not getting enough training time doing use of force, doing, the less than lethal training, doing de-escalation training. I don't even think some of the law enforcement agencies have actual de-escalation training, and I know it's not part of the
Let me ask you this.
Training.
So we have a sheriff in each county who we elect. And then we have all these little banana republics setting up their own police departments. Mm-hmm. We have duplication. We have people overlapping. Do you think we need to go back to county-wide police forces and towards Unigov? Is that a better solution? Do bigger departments provide better training? Do bigger departments have better chances of actually performing at a higher level?
Well, I would say from a state perspective, I think it would be important that the counties take control of a lot of the training for those individuals, training, qualification, and make sure everything's standardized, not just across the county, but across the entire state. But secondly, you have, I'm a big fan of kind of leaving decisions closest to the people it's going to affect. So I don't mind having a lot of these, like you call them, the banana republics. I think it's important to have some local policing.
But police forces with 6 people for a township, or 8 people, or it just that's not a real department.
If the individuals that are paying for it are willing to pay for it, then I don't really have a problem with it. As long as they can pay for a real professional.
How do you feel about private police departments? I'm talking about Miami Valley Hospital. I'm talking about the Wright State and UD. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about Kettering Health. I'm talking about Metro Parks. These guys all have police officers that are reporting to nobody. Mm-hmm. And most of them are state trained, have been police officers in a real department or in the sheriff's department, and go work in private police. Do you think that's really okay to have a president of the university run a bunch of people with guns? Or do you think we should probably roll those back and say no more of that? You hire real police officers from your municipality? I mean, there was a shooting and by a UC cop on a traffic stop. And, I mean, where does that fit in?
Yeah, when you end up hiring
Samuel
people like
DeVoe
that,
shouldn't have died by a private cop.
yeah, colleges kind of need some type of at least minimal security to protect it against any type of rapes or individual problems between individuals.
Have somebody in from the sheriff's department.
But as far as private, I just don't. I'm not a big fan of the private cops because I don't think they actually have kind of the line of authority they need to do the job that they actually need. If they don't have that line of authority, they don't have the backing, then they're not going to be able to do the job in the manner that they need to.
Okay. So what about the Greene County Jail? That's been a big issue for a while, and they say they need a new jail, and people are saying they don't want to pay for it, and the old jail is unsafe, the new jail, they're going to build now with some sort of bond issue. How do you feel about that, and should there be that much need for that many beds, or are we locking a lot of people up that don't need to be locked up?
We are.
Or how do we solve this? Because we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world, and yet we call ourselves a free country.
Mm-hmm. We overkill on a lot of what we do when it comes to enforcement. When it comes to a lot of the small drug things, I think it's important to, I don't want to say get rid of those laws, but, tone down those laws. Those laws are realistically meant more for, if a cop needs to find out more about an individual, you have those laws in place. Sometimes the cops will call it fishing. It's basically where you're looking for more information. You don't really need to enforce that stuff. I think in our judicial system, we need to drop a lot of these minor charges. They don't mean anything. You throw someone in jail for something stupid, and you just end up training someone in basically a criminal skill by throwing them in jail at that point.
Aren't they using jails basically as mental health facilities for at least 25% of their populations?
Mental health or even health treatment facilities for addicts. I mean, a jail is no place for someone to come off of drugs. They need realistically a mental health or a hospital.
So there have been some moves in other states they've talked about providing injection sites that are monitored, so you can go there and shoot up and you can test your drugs first for purity, and there's somebody there to handle, they call them harm reduction sites, but they make sure that you get clean needles, there's supervision. Do you think that's a better approach than what we do now, where we just show up and try to hope for with Narcan to save these people over and over? I mean, are we making any progress on this, or they've done it in Portugal and they saw death rates drop phenomenally. They had a lot less medical problems. Mm-hmm. They've looked at it in British Columbia. They've looked at it in some other states. Can you see that as a viable solution, or is that not within your political?
As far as I'm willing to stretch.
Yeah.
I think from a standpoint of decriminalizing things that are verifiable medical issues like addiction, decriminalizing things that are, if an individual is suffering from some type of mental breakdown, anxiety, probably as a military member, quite a few people that have been through some serious, mental health issues.
Oh yeah.
And I just don't think having law enforcement run that all the way through is the
right answer.
Well, it's not a good answer. It's a waste of money when it comes to jailing, and it doesn't really help the individual. Doesn't solve the problem. If anything, it kind of exacerbates the problem.
Okay.
We're wasting money on a lot of bad solutions.
And every time, people don't understand, when people are already at rock bottom and you throw them in jail, and they stop making their car payment, they stop making their house payment, they stop showing up for work, they lose their job, they lose their house, they lose their car, and all of a sudden now they're in even worse shape. They were already precarious probably, now they're screwed. Mm-hmm. And then we end up having to try to build them back up. It's like we cause make the problem worse, mm-hmm. and then take on responsibility to fix it instead of trying to fix it proactively.
Right.
All right, let me, this is something, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there have been some problems at the Montgomery County Jail. Mm-hmm. Pepper spraying inmates in 7-point restraint chairs. There was one video where they just had this woman who was a sergeant doing it, and he came out, and Phil Plummer, who was then the sheriff, said, "Oh no, this was an isolated incident," and he actually promoted her to major, and then she took a medical retirement after sitting at a desk for a year. So that was number one. But he said this doesn't happen. And then I got a video of a second instance where they did it to a guy, point blank, pepper spray. He's in the face. He's in a restraint chair, and the video shows like the guards pulling up their kerchiefs and stuff because they were used to this. This is not the first time it's happened. And I released this video. Me personally, I look at that and I see violations of not just our laws. I see the Geneva Convention. You cannot do that to people. And if they had asthma, they'd be dead, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I see very dangerous things going on in these jails, and Phil Plummer is now a state representative and supposedly going to be our next Speaker of the House. Would you vote for a man who oversaw a jail where they pepper sprayed people point blank? Can you imagine what that's like? I mean, you've had training.
Oh, I've been pepper sprayed before.
Yeah. Were you in restraints?
No, I wasn't.
Was there a Lister bag around to wash your face off?
Yeah. There was.
And it didn't help, did it? It's painful.
The proper application of force is something that every single law enforcement agent, whether that be in jails all the way up to police out on the road, it should be something that we teach our dispatchers. My personal feeling is that if we're going to arm anyone gets a weapon. I think use of force is an important thing to know, just when you shouldn't engage someone. How to identify what is real and what is not real. Tactics for de-escalating situation as opposed to some people just in their personality.
Wait a second, you're in a 7-point restraint chair.
No, I know, and that's at that point. At that point, they're already they're not. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of.
You can walk away.
You got to look into those kind of instances, and
so if you were a state rep and you found out that was happening in your district, what would you do?
It would probably generate some type of investigation into what type of training, what type of behaviors, what type of culture is going on in that law enforcement agency.
You wouldn't let the sun go down until somebody's brought to justice, right?
No, absolutely.
That's inappropriate. Those people that did that are still working at the Montgomery County Jail. And Phil Plummer handed off the jail to Rob Streck, who won re-election, and nobody's ever been charged. I have a real problem with that. And that Plummer is in line to be our state rep. If we get enough Democrats elected, we don't have that problem. He will not be Speaker of the House. And if you're smart, you vote for LaRonda Lucky, and he doesn't have a job at all. And I hope to have LaRonda on here as well. But these sorts of things, it amazes me that people look and think this is no big deal because, that guy had it coming. And I don't think anybody ever has pepper spray coming when they're in a 7-point restraint chair. I mean, that's just, that is criminal behavior.
Well, if you're not looking right, one of the biggest reasons to be in law enforcement is to look out for people, to take care of people. Because if I'm not looking out for you and something bad happens to you, you kind of got to take it on as yourself. My own responsibility. It could happen to me too. So my defending everyone else is realistically defending myself, defending my family, stopping that type of criminal culture and that cultural behavior from happening. The surrender to believe that we can't have or can't make a difference it's a disease that we have to get rid of. We can make a difference if we get out, take care of the people around us, be responsible citizens, report things when they need to be reported. Don't report things that are ridiculous.
All right, so next question. Ohio has had unconstitutionally funded schools for over 20 plus years.
Oh my goodness.
What's if you're in the State House, this is an issue you could take action on. What are your thoughts about our funding of public schools and our running of public schools? Do you have anything to share that separates you from Mr. Lampton or anybody else?
Very much so. So in the last couple of years, the Republicans in the State House have done a lot to, we'll say, claim to cut our taxes. And they've really done nothing more than shift the tax burden to property owners when it comes to not funding, or at least appropriately funding, schools. It's in our Constitution, that we pay for schools. We need to fund them from the state level as opposed to forcing, the 65-year-old retiree on Social Security that can't afford, more taxes leveraged on her property. We need to relieve a lot of that property tax and fund the schools in the manner with which our Constitution, first and foremost, requires. And anything above and beyond, it might require lifting some requirements, but we have to look at those requirements. We have to look at everything the state mandates and actually fund those mandates, as opposed to, come up with some crazy idea that we're training our youth to be guilty about some strange thing that happened in the past, and then go through and evaluate all those lesson plans, which cost money for the school to do, and they go all the way through that, and we ask our schools to do, much like we ask our cops to do, some crazy stuff, and then they're called unfunded mandates.
Right.
We don't fund those, and we've got to get away from doing that, because that money just goes towards the pot of money that comes from our property taxes.
We have 88 counties, and we used to have 88 school boards.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have 618 school districts and school boards and superintendents and treasurers. It seems like we have way too much governmental overhead to do something that's really not that difficult. I mean, you don't need a treasurer and a superintendent for a district that's 450 students like it is in Jefferson Township. That's just insane. That's an elementary school, folks. I mean, where are they getting these ideas? So, I mean, would you back consolidating these districts, or would you say enough of this local control BS and we can eliminate some of this overhead and get serious about education and funding it properly? Because we don't need all this overhead. We don't need all these school board members who aren't education professionals.
Well, I think if we actually go and fund the schools from the appropriate level, the need for a lot of those positions
goes away.
I mean, you don't really need a treasurer if you're actually paying per student, prices. How much is it going to cost for you to train a student? And it's going to be a different price in Cleveland than it is down in Cincinnati, than it is in Toledo. So obviously those costs are going to change. But if we fund those requirements appropriately, a lot of those needs start going away. I think we'd end up with a lot smaller government if we actually funded it from the appropriate location.
Have you had any talks with anybody about debating Mr. Mr.
Lampton?
Mr. Lampton?
Yeah.
Is there going to be a debate? I'm sorry.
I pray, please, just put him on stage next to me, because I think it's just going to be one of those points where you're going to hear him talk, you're going to hear me talk, you're probably going to be like, well, this is an easy choice. This is a super easy choice. I suspect that we're probably not going to be seen on stage together where anyone can videotape anything, because I think
I've got cameras. I'll be happy to call.
I know. I'll definitely call you.
I'll bring popcorn.
They don't want him on stage next to me. I'm absolutely sure it's part of their strategy to keep him as far away from me, to make up some crazy lies about Democrats or crazy lies about me.
Have you always been a Democrat?
No.
Okay, that's something interesting.
No, it was actually. It had to do with my daughter. A lot of things that happened. Well, as you know, as a military member, your only recourse for certain things, if your chain of command doesn't satisfy you, is your congressman and your senators in your state. So things were going very wrong with how my daughter's death was getting investigated. They hid a lot of things. They destroyed my daughter's tissue. The actual medical examiner at the Pentagon I would talk to him and he'd be like, man, I'm getting pressured, from the hospital all the time. And I knew he wasn't comfortable with it. They were hiding a lot of information. Plus, I was required to get counseling in the very same hospital that they killed my daughter. So I passed the steps my wife went up when she took my daughter up to the surgical unit. Every single time I went there for counseling, and they wouldn't let me go downtown. So I contacted congressman and senator. Congressman at the time was.
Where were you?
It was. We lived out in Xenia at the time.
Okay.
It was
Steve Austria.
Steve Austria. It would have been George Voinovich was the senator, and then Sherrod Brown was the other senator. And the Republicans, ran from me. It was, my entire life, probably even your entire life. You heard Republicans. We're gonna back the military. We're behind the military 100%. Anything you guys need, we're gonna be behind you. And
it's about if you're a defense contractor.
Yeah, exactly. And when it came to protecting my family and realistically just getting the health care I needed,
Sherrod Brown came through.
Sherrod Brown stepped in, made sure I got seen downtown. They were actually taking things that I was saying in my mental health counseling, my grief counseling, and
which are supposed to be protected.
And by HIPAA, they were passing that on to their lawyers. It ended up getting up to my wife's lawyer. He asked me, "Hey, why are you saying this?" And I was like, "I've never told anyone except for my therapist that." So Sherrod, stepped in and saved me. And like I said, the Republicans that were supposed to, in my opinion, should have been the first there to say, "Oh, no, we're not going to let this happen." They didn't, and it was Sherrod Brown.
Let me ask you, I know this is a national level question, but as a military member, as somebody who swore to protect the Constitution, everything else, tell me how you feel about January 6th.
So, January 6th, a lot of people don't know this, but January 6th had two security forces members, or previous members, die. Brian Sicknick was a previous security forces member, and Ashley, I think Babbitt, was also another one.
Different sides.
Yeah, totally different sides. We've been there. A lot of us in security forces, the brothers and sisters, all have specific feelings about what happened that day. A lot of people on the right like to point out that we had all these riots during these other times. What's the difference between what happened here as opposed to what happened on January 6th? And the big difference is that Congress at that time was fulfilling an actual constitutionally mandated requirement. So anyone that went there to actually stop that mandated requirement was acting opposite of what the Constitution requires us. It's treason. It's light treason. They definitely need.
And what's the penalty for treason, as you understand?
Well, I don't think we need to go out and shoot people or anything, but I think
that is the prescribed.
Well, in a time of war, it absolutely is.
Does attacking the capital of our country count as war? Had those people been wearing Russian uniforms, what would the difference?
Oh, it definitely would have been. Yeah, if it was a foreign force.
Then we would have been shooting them.
Yeah, this is this is a domestic force, and they were very, very misled. Do I think there's a certain amount of liability that goes along with that? Yeah, absolutely. You need. We're known for our peaceful transition from power one person to another. Yeah. There's a long process. There's a lot of tradition that goes along with that. We need to follow those processes. We need to respect those traditions. It's who we are. It's what we are as Americans. It's the foundation of everything we believe in. So, and by not following those things, I think
what's your sum it up short now?
Short?
What's your feeling about January 6th?
January 6th, those people probably need some jail time at a minimum. People that entered into the facility or any other area that would have been restricted should probably spend some time in jail.
How would you have felt if you were on that police line? How would you have handled these people?
I don't know if I would have been as
restrained,
patient, or no. That's that's a very that's a great question. All of my training when it comes to protecting resources. National resources, the Capitol is every bit as much of a national resource as our president, as the White House, as some of the Supreme Court. Those institutions absolutely have to be protected, not just from a standpoint of them being able to do their jobs without fear of being attacked, but also from the standpoint of just the level of importance they are to who we are as a country. So I think it's important that we protect those institutions.
So, had you been the commanding officer of that police force on that day, would you have told them not to shoot these people? Would you have told them not to, just start putting them in handcuffs and zip ties and laying them in a line? I mean, I'm amazed because normal training says you take them one by one off the line and you just zip tie them and hog tie them and move on to the next one. Mm-hmm. That's sort of where I would start.
One thing I don't like to do as a cop, and one thing I really hate to do, the armchair quarterbacking of, and once I were to learn more about what was going on in each of the different areas, I may have done things different, but realistically, until the whole report, until everything, is really vetted and all the investigation comes to light, which I pray it does at some point, I don't think it's really appropriate to say whether I would or whether I wouldn't. It's.
Let me ask you something else. You had, obviously at times, protecting classified documents. Mm-hmm. You know what a skiff is. Mm-hmm. What would your job do if somebody from the base took home stuff that was marked TSSCI? What would happen?
They'd immediately be arrested. Immediately. Yeah. And
would they be immediately put in jail?
Yeah. I'm certain of it.
And their building would be searched. Mm-hmm. And every record, every phone, every computer would be taken out of there. Yeah. Every camera would be assessed. And they would be waiting in jail until we figured out what they released, because that could kill people, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Grave damage to national security is top secret. So, any of that information getting out, if it should never ever go outside of any area that's not fully secured.
And describe what a fully secured. Some people don't know what a skiff
is. Secured compartmentalized information facility is the skiff. But a skiff is built basically in a manner that monitoring can't take place. Us talking in this room right now, someone could point a laser beam at the window and read the laser beam, hear everything we're saying. There are electronic devices that can basically
pierce walls
and monitor all the equipment. They can see exactly what you have on all your screens in here.
Everything in a skiff is lead-lined walls, secured.
It's got a Faraday device totally surrounding it.
And there's absolute access control. You don't walk in or out of it without. I mean, you're scripping down to your undies if they really don't trust you, and you go in there and you look at it and then you walk out. Right. Mm-hmm. So, is there any excuse for President Trump at all?
To the best of my knowledge, there has not been a need for a president to have the rumored material that was found there, and they've not really confirmed if there were any type of nuclear codes, nuclear capabilities of. There's been no real confirmation. All that's really been is rumor and conjecture. Would they?
I mean, this is truly what the Glomar response is: cannot confirm or deny because it's national security.
Exactly, because we don't have access to that information.
But he did not have a skiff. The stuff wasn't stored.
What's the National Archives going back and forth with the president for on information that there's not a lot of top secret information that a president could have that wouldn't be immediately declassified, because so much of the top secret information is time sensitive information. So at 1200 hours, when this event's over with and the primary individuals moved on, that information is no longer classified, and the declassification takes place.
But you don't store the stuff in your guest bathroom. It's ever.
Not in the bathroom, not in the unlocked basement, no.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that, because I know you know what a skiff looks like, and I know you understand.
Had to. It's a pain in the butt process, not just to get access to a skiff. It's a pain in the butt process to go in and out of the skiff. You have to very diligently account for all the information that you have. You have checks Every few hours, you have checks at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. You check all of the locks to make sure everything is secured. I mean, there's a lot that goes into securing classified information as well. There should be.
All right. We've been going a little longer than we normally have, but, you know, it's okay. Do you have any questions for me?
What made you run?
This time, January 6th.
Really?
It scared the living crap out of me. That Americans would actually think that our elections were fraudulent and that they should go and hang the vice president, to me, says the current people who didn't impeach Donald Trump for that really shouldn't be in office. In fact, if they think the election was contested, many of those representatives and many of those senators were elected in that election, and then if they don't believe in it, they should be removed. I saw the other two candidates that were running, and I knew one of them, and I didn't think they stood a chance in hell against Mike Turner, nor did they understand what they were doing. I've done this before. But realistically, this goes back with me and Turner from a long time, and I know better than most what makes Mike Turner tick and what will tick him off. And considering the district's unconstitutional, a +9, it'll be a major miracle if I come within 9 points. He's got millions of dollars. I do not. But I am going to give it the best effort, and I guarantee you I will do the same sort of thing once elected, where I tell you at the end of every day what happened in Congress, what I did, ask your input, and tell you what's coming up next and get input, because that's what an elected representative does. And I just wanted to do a quick shout out to both Jennifer Alexander and Tamara Stefanik for pumping in with comments. Anybody else who's been watching all this, we really appreciate. If you're watching it later, hey, thank you. You can find out more about Eric at Eric Price
for All.
Eric Price for All, FORall.com. His website. You can donate money there. I have donated money to his campaign. I suggest you do too, because that's the only way this thing changes. If you want to volunteer, Eric would be glad to have you volunteer and go door to door and talk to people. He'll have signs, he'll have literature for you to hand out, and most importantly, he now has a video that people can watch and learn more about him, because it's really hard to reach people with 30-second commercials and yard signs. That really doesn't tell you anything about the person. So that's why I'm doing this and doing it with Eric. And I hope that everybody understands that you vote D for go forward or R for going in reverse at this point. That's about the easiest way to understand it. We didn't talk about Roe v. Wade because that's really more of a national issue that they're trying to push down the states, but I'm going to guess you're pro-choice.
I'm definitely pro-choice,
Okay.
and it's funny. I probably take a different spin when it comes to most Democrats, because I think it's a religious choice. I think anyone that denies a woman access to that type of health care denies their First Amendment rights to be able to practice their religion in the way they see fit. And in Ohio, it's specifically said it's a conscious choice.
Okay.
So that's
I could get you in trouble here. I could ask you a question that's also one of those type choice questions.
okay.
Vaccinations. I mean, the military required you to get one.
Right.
And I got plenty when I was a kid.
For me, it's just been kind of really, is this an issue? Why are people getting... Because I had spent 25 years in...
Did you ever get gamma globin?
Oh,
in the butt?
Yeah,
One? Yeah, that one really sucked.
I've been poked, prodded so many times when it comes to vaccinations.
But we do it because it protects the unit. It's about me protecting you. And that's my number one job in the military. Protect my buddies. Because if I don't protect my buddies and they don't protect me, there's a word we have, which we can't say on this, but it's called a buddy sucker.
We call it Blue Falcon.
Oh, you call it Blue Falcon?
Blue Falcon, yeah.
We called it something else.
Yep. Pretty much the same thing.
But you don't want to be that person.
No, you don't want to.
And there is no way to protect each other if we don't all go in on some things like this together. And I just find it amazing that there are people who put themselves above the integrity of the team, basically, and say, well, I don't have to do it, knowing that they could either spread it or have it mutate within them, and then
Yeah. How long have we been
worse.
going here?
We've been going too long. It's 4:57.
So we're coming up on an hour, actually. We've been sitting here and talking for about an hour, and while we're sitting here spraying back and forth on each other, and we're inhaling, we probably even
that poor guy.
that poor guy there is, he's been sucking in a lot of our germs. Now, the majority of them are probably harmless and won't make each of us sick, but I mean, I don't think we really understand how connected we are as individuals when we get close. We're passing all kinds of good fun stuff back and forth.
Of course, I do have my mask here. My mask says that I made. It says this mask is an IQ test, not a political statement. And I was selling these because it's about protecting yourself and protecting your community. Anyways, but yeah, we've been sitting here spreading germs.
Yeah, people don't think about that those invisible. Can we pick on Marines?
That's too easy.
Is that all I know? It's
That's
easy.
Too easy. No.
So we were over in Kuwait, and I absolutely love Marines, wonderful people. But we were over there, and ISIS was starting to become a thing.
Right.
We were seeing a lot more things on the perimeter of our base. So they started bringing a few Marines. We ended up increasing our base population. I think we went from 3,000 to 5,000. And when you're over in the desert, you've only got so much water to share. Mm-hmm. And I thought, great, now I'm never going to get a shower. So the Marines came, and it was weird because I didn't lose any water pressure at all. It's like I got to shower just as much before as after, and I was like, well, this is weird. They must be doing a real good job. So I asked our CE friends, are we using a lot more water with all these Marines? And they said, they're just not showering. And so our base went into a bit of a lockdown because there was a rotavirus sickness going around because there were that many more people.
Believe it or not, in Special Forces Survival School, they do teach you hygiene because it's essential. If you don't stay healthy when you're out on your own, it gets bad fast.
Yeah, we call it fieldcraft skills.
Yeah.
And you
don't want fungus growing in your feet because next thing you know, you won't be able to walk.
Marines have a very, I would say, if they practice it that way, they probably have a very good immune system.
All right, so any last things at all here? Because we should wrap it up.
Yeah, we probably should. I just, I've had, this whole process is an exhausting process, but for me it's a very satisfying process because I get to meet so many amazing individuals from, running into you, working with you, out there campaigning with you, to just realistically every single person that I've come across has been, almost a blessing in my life. It energizes me that, so many people are interested. As a vet, I think one of the, people like to say, thank you for your service. Well, one of the things that I think is most satisfying is knowing that people are actually going out, voting their conscience, voting for things that are important to them. That's the thing I think we can do to thank our vets, thank all the individuals that have put so much in ensuring the freedoms that we have in this world. I think that's very important to do, and it motivates me. It keeps me going every day. So
you don't get as much pushback as I do, but
no, I understand that, but
yeah, when you give a speech and people are they're clapping and they're applauding and they're happy and they're thinking, yeah, that's what we need. Mm-hmm. There's no better feeling because you're giving people hope, and this country is built on trust, first off, and everything. And we've lost a lot of that trust over the last 4 years, and our idiot in chief, where he talks about fake news and, stolen elections and all the rest of it. And it's time to put that trust back in government through transparency, through communication, through integrity, by electing the people who don't have billionaires buying them from out of state. And trust me, my race, his race is the same thing. I guarantee you, if you look at the campaign finance reports, Mr. Lampton has a lot more money than Mr. Price. And that's just the way they own us. So it's time to go in and start making changes. And the great thing is those of us that have been doing this for a while can help the guys that are starting out the first time. And we build a network together of activists who can communicate to people. And we build our tribes beneath us. And hopefully they continue to grow. And eventually we will overcome and move this country forward in a way that we're safer here than the guys. We were safe here as they were in Iraq and Afghanistan. We lose more people here every year than we lost in 20 years through opiates, through shootings, through police brutality, through stupidity. We could fix that here. And if it takes a couple of veterans to tell you how to make your country safer, maybe that's the best advice you can get. And I'm really proud to be running at the same time as Eric. And it's been great getting to know him. Do not arm wrestle this man ever. Okay? Don't do it. We had one kid from Cedarville. He put a valiant effort in, and the arm did not move. All right.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, and we've had fun doing this. So I'd like to thank those of you that stayed through here. And Jennifer, I don't know if we're both going to that meeting on Monday, but I think that probably Eric will be there at the Bellbrook meeting.
Oh, yeah,
to talk about that. I don't know. I've got an NAACP event that night, so I cannot. But thank you for watching. If you're watching this later, we do this every day at 4 p.m. I'm trying to get all the candidates to come through here. I've offered. I'm David Esrati, and this is my version of a town hall, something Mike Turner's never done in 20 years. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 with another subject, and thank you.